Start recording. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just for the sake of time, get started. We'll still let people in as they come in. My name is Nikki Caboose. I'm the CEO of South Florida Tech Hub. And just really quickly, a little bit about us is basically we are a fully regional tech nonprofit that's working with everything from kids in K through 12 and teaching them how to code all the way up through our professionals and CIOs and so on, helping with everything from educational resources like this, lunch and learn, to networking events, working with the higher education institutions. We do a lot of monthly events as well, whether you're interested in education, networking, or like a larger event. We do a lot of like golf events, award shows, tech conferences, but there's always something to get involved in. And our members are basically anybody that is a tech company or is tech enabled, somebody that's connected to tech in some way. So we do a lot of business with directly technology innovation and a lot of startup companies as well. So our members range from a brand new startup with a founder with a new idea all the way through the Office Depots and FPLs and City Furnitures. So we have a little bit of everybody in between. And I'll make sure to drop our website link if anybody's interested, but I don't want to take time from the great presentation that Rob has today. So I'm going to go ahead and just pass it over to you, Rob, and let you go ahead and get started. And like I said, I'll make sure to drop information on Tech Hub in the chat for anybody that's interested.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Nikki. And hello, everybody. Welcome to this Lunch and Learn session where we can talk about one of my favorite passions to nerd out on, that's Excel. And I hope that we can provide you some good information. And just like Nikki was saying, we can also make this interactive. I'll probably get through some of the basic stuff a little bit fast because I think a lot of people already have a good foundation, and then we can work into the probably more interesting things as we go. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, Excel Essentials from Zero to Hero. And since it says zero on there, I am going to cover some of the basic stuff first. So my name is Rob Valdez. I'm a CPA here in Florida. I'm also an information system auditor and information security manager. So that's cybersecurity. I work for a large CPA firm called Cohn Resnick. There I'm the director of cyber tech risk and privacy services. I'm also an adjunct professor at FAU where I teach accounting, information systems, and data analytics for accounting. And then I volunteer for this association called ISACA South Florida. Happy to talk with you about any of this stuff. And you can connect with me directly on LinkedIn if you're interested in doing that. So in today's lunch, we're going to cover a couple of things at least. We're going to talk about some of the basic best practices for organizing data in Excel, talk about some common functions and functionality and formulas, how to use them, and then start to apply some of these useful tools for data transformation, data analysis, pivot tables, charts, other types of interactions that are pretty common. You'll notice that I'm actually giving this presentation out of Excel because I thought that that would be an appropriate place to do it. So if you feel like opening up Excel and kind of following along with some of this stuff, feel free to do that. Otherwise, as Nikki said, this is recorded, so you can watch and pay attention now and then practice and follow along later. All right, so let's cover some of the basics. First of all, let's talk about some terminology so that I don't say stuff that sounds confusing to you. So I'm working out of this file. This is called an Excel workbook. This whole file, it's in the software of Excel, of course, and any entire file is called a workbook. So if you hear me say workbook, that's what that's about. These things that I'm navigating through across the bottom, some people call them worksheets, some people call them individual spreadsheets, sometimes sheets, sometimes tabs. Sheets is probably the most common thing that you'll hear, but any of those terms might get used. And then let's hop over here to the right, make sure that we're talking about some of this stuff in the same way. Any one of these intersections of a number that labels a row and a letter, that's a cell. And then cells are where we actually enter data. And then anytime you enter the equal sign and then maybe put, for example, a math problem like 5 plus 5, and you get the results there, that's a formula. And so when I say formula, that's what I'm talking about. There are some special types of formulas that are referred to as functions. Let's navigate up to in the top ribbon here, the bar that says formulas, and then you'll see this section here that says function library. So some people differentiate between the term function and formula. You don't have to, you can use them interchangeably. A lot of people do, but specific formulas that have been memorized for useful purposes are actually called functions. And an example of that would be like looking at maybe an if statement, like a conditional, or looking at a date time calculation, like convert some type of value to a date, or other types of math types of calculations, like a cosine, if you're actually getting to trigonometry. Those all have functions that are memorized in them, and you can access all these very useful libraries from here, including statistical engineering, information, web, other types of functions as well. Then within an individual cell and on the sheet, you can use fonts. If we go back to home, you can see that you can change the font if for any reason that's important or useful to you. As part of your presentation of the information, you could certainly do that. And then within the cells, you can, if you'll look still here in the home section in alignment tab, you can change the alignment of the contents of the cell. Let's say you want to actually right justify it, or center it, or middle center it, or whatever, or you want to merge several cells together. You can do all that from here in the alignment area. And then finally, on the style tab, you can kind of hop in here into this style group and maybe differently code or present information in certain ways. A lot of times people use this to say, here's the sort of input cells. Maybe they're going to say, this is a calculation. This is something that's being calculated by a formula, or this is an input. If you're going to change any values, they'll code those special cells and say, change these values to kind of manipulate this spreadsheet. And then finally, perhaps most important of all, still with presentation, right here in the middle, there's a number kind of formatting where you can leave something formatted as general content, a number. You can change it to currency. Now you'll see the $ just got added there, and it's got the 2 decimal places. You can change things to dates, times, percentages. All these things are different ways of changing the presentation of information. So that's the very basic in terms of terminology and in terms of some really simple formatting. So let's talk about entering data into a sheet. A lot of times what we try and do, especially when you get into data engineering, data science, data analytics, is you try and use your rows to represent records. So your file grows down the sheet, and you try and use your columns to represent attributes or different features or important information about your records. So when I say column, I'm talking to the vertical alignment. When I say row, I'm saying the data moving across the page. And so this is a good way to try and structure and organize your data. And then you can highlight a certain number of cells by clicking and dragging your mouse. And then you can, in this lower right-hand corner, there's that little handlebar. You can drag that down. That'll increment up. It'll continue counting. You can do cut, copy, and paste just the same way that you do in Word. Let's say Control-C, Control-V. You can cut, copy, and paste multiple values, of course. And you could even find and replace by clicking Control-H and say, all right, every time you see Bob, change it to Frank or something like that, and replace all, and then that'll go ahead and make those 2 replacements there. So a lot of the same Microsoft Office functionality that you're used to using translates right directly into Excel. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about kind of when you're get a file, maybe it's passed to you as a CSV, that's a comma separated value file. Maybe you export something from a system, maybe you export something from your CRM like HubSpot, or maybe you export something from QuickBooks, or somebody sends you over a flat file from a database, and you get a file that looks like this, right? It kind of says some word and then comma and then another word, comma. And if you look at this, you can see really quickly that what's happening here is it's a comma separated value file that all the rows have commas to indicate where there would be a new type of data, and then the labels are up here on top. So people oftentimes use the text to columns functionality within Excel to take care of this type of data and structure it as a more traditional type of structured data in a table that you can work with. So if we look at our workbook at the top, I'm going to click on the ribbon that says data, and then I'm going to click on this button right here that says text to columns. And that'll bring up a dialog box where it says, are these delimited values? That is, they have something in between each one of them, or is it fixed width? Like there's a certain number of characters that count between each one of these data values. And I'm going to say these are delimited because they're all separated by commas, and then I'll choose the delimiter. It's not a tab, it's not a semicolon, it's actually a comma. And now I can sort of preview what this is going to look like when I separate that. I'll go ahead and click next to kind of walk through this little wizard. Everything looks fine, so I'll click finish. And now you see that this is structured a little bit more as a type of table that I would expect. So it splits the data into these columns. And now I have these records moving down the sheet, and it's a little bit more workable. All right, let me pause there for just a second, getting through some of the most basic stuff. Are we so far so good with everything we're doing? Checking the comments. No comments yet. All right. It looks good. Okay, let's keep going. So now let's talk about when we have this data and people are giving us different files, people are recording information in different Excel worksheets, and maybe recording records and tracking orders, tracking members, tracking revenue, tracking expenses, all kinds of stuff. They may kind of like almost free form, just kind of take notes. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Maybe they're just thinking, they're just dropping information on the page, dropping data on the page. And maybe as a result of that, they're not necessarily structuring data, right? They're not necessarily like separating values by columns the way I just was referring to. And so they might kind of like put information like this, like here's our inventory items. We have blue shirt, yellow shirt, gray pants, red pants, black pants, etc. They all come in small, medium, large. Maybe they just write the sizes with a comma in between them. And maybe they put these prices here for the small, price for the medium, price for the large, right? Okay, so we're going to talk a tiny bit of data structuring and actually thinking about our data and reasoning through it. We want to have a little bit better structured and organization to our data. This is not conversation about database management. So we're not going to talk about first normal form, second normal form, third normal form. But if you look at this information on the right-hand side, you'll see that what we've done is separated each record to where it's one single item, right? So a blue shirt that's small costs $5. And that's going to have a unique ID number 1, right? I'm kind of arbitrarily throwing this out. And then a blue shirt that's medium. Oops, I misspelled medium, right? So let's find and replace that. So medium is not the right way. It's medium. There we go. So let's replace all. There we go. See, now we're just using some of these skills already. You can put blue shirt medium, that's $7, blue shirt that's large, $10, etc. Right? And now we're going to talk about another type of functionality, which really takes advantage of the data when you have it structured and organized in this way, which is how we want to structure it. And that's called Excel tables. So we'll go ahead and hit Control T while I'm anywhere inside of this range. A range is a set of values starting in an upper left-hand corner and going to a lower right-hand corner. And you see that when I hit Control T, automatically identifies a range. And it says, does this range have headers? Does it have labels across the top? The answer is yes. And you see that the box is checked. So I'll go ahead and click OK. And now it transforms this range to a table. And Excel has a lot of different functionality for tables that it just has for ranges. And we'll look at some of those different types of functionality in just a second. But what we can also see is that it actually throws some nice formatting in there, puts some alternated coloring, kind of identifies our headers on there, and already puts this sort of additional functionality right there where we can see the different value types that are in each row within the column, right? So some good stuff there. And one of the additional functionalities that we can use to make sure that data is getting entered well into our table is something called data validation. So with data validation, you can basically say there's only a certain number of values that people can enter into each cell within a certain range. And right now, what I've done is I've put data validation on this column, type, and I said somebody can only use shirt or pants when they're entering information here, and that's from this list. And the way that I did that was you can click on data and then click on data validation, and then it's going to say what type of values do you want to allow here? Any value whatsoever, letters, numbers, symbols, whatever. That can be a little chaotic, right? Maybe you just want to allow whole numbers, maybe you want decimal numbers, maybe you want somebody to be compelled, forced to choose from a list. That's what I did. And then it said, where is this list? And so I went ahead and identified that the list was right here, and then clicked OK. And now you'll see as you move down this record set, every single time somebody goes here to enter something, they really have to choose from this list. If they try and put, I don't know, let's say stocking, I can't think of another article, or hat, right? Then it'll say that type of value is not allowed. So you can kind of compel people to enter data that's a little bit more conformed and prevent them from accidentally entering the wrong data type into a certain cell. So that's data validation, keeps a nice clean data set. Very helpful when you start to get with big data sets that are being entered into manually, right? So let's check the chat and keep going. Awesome, perfect. Looking good. So now we're going to hop into some basic formulas and functions. Here we can see a range that has not yet been converted to a table. And we see that it's got orders, right? So there's order IDs, and then what did they order? They ordered a shirt, or here they ordered some pants. And what was the price and the quantity and subtotal, and then plus shipping gives us a total, right? So in order to kind of make this data set, what we've done is we've used some additional functionalities within Excel that include things like formulas and functions and some references as well, right? So in order to get this subtotal, if we think logically about what's happening here, then somebody has ordered 3 shirts at $5 a piece, and we know that 3 times 5 is 15. So the way that we got that in Excel was we actually went ahead and used a formula. We hit enter, and then came over here to this price value, used the asterisk, which is the multiplication symbol in Excel, and then selected the quantity because price times quantity gives us that subtotal. And then there we go. That created that formula. And then if we wanted to make sure that that formula was the same throughout this entire record set, all we'd have to do is double click on this handlebar right here in the lower right hand corner, and we see that it drags down the entire record set. And now if we scan down here, we see that it's using that, look up here in the formula bar. We see that it enters in that same formula in every cell relative to whatever row it's on. So as I move down rows, it keeps incrementing, right? And then we move over to the right, we got some shipping here, and I actually have a conditional logic entered into this box, and that is if G16, which is going to be the quantity, if the quantity is less than 5, then make the shipping $6. If it's not, make it $9. And so the way I entered that was I said equals if, and then hit tab, and it goes ahead and identifies that function and enters in a parentheses side. And I said if this quantity shipped is less than 5, then make the shipping $6. If not, make it $9, right? So you saw those little sort of tool tips or prompts that was happening here. It asked me first for the logical test, then the value if the answer to that test was true. That's why I put 6. If it's less than 5, then the answer is going to be 6. And then the value if it's false. I put another comma, and then I put a 9, and then parenthesis, close parenthesis. And so it determined that it's 6 because there's only 3 items being shipped here, but down here you see 7 items being shipped, so $9. And then finally another formula here. So the total is equal to the subtotal plus shipping. That's how we get a total. So here we've used a formula here, a function here, which is from our conditional logic, right? The if statement, and you've got all the information that you need, and you can enter it in a bunch of different ways. You can use this dialog box to enter, or you can enter straight from the formula like I was doing. And then finally, these other formula to get you the total for that line item. So we used relevant references, multiplied and added cells, and we used a sum to get this total. We use multiplication. We can also come down here and we can say alt equals, and that does a sum of the entire column. Or I can just, and then we can double click on the column header to give ourselves enough space, or we can just say equals sum, and then tab, that gives us the parentheses, come all the way up, hit enter, and we'll get the sum of all these orders. We could also say equals average and get the average of all these orders. Or we could say, and you see the average is $49.27, or you could say equals count, and we'll see how many orders there are. And there are 15 orders, and that's not a dollar amount, so you would change your data type there and probably not put decimals on it. You say, okay, there's 15 orders there. So that's how we can use a bunch of different formulas, functions, all on one sheet. And if we decided we wanted to organize this as a table, just like we did on the last sheet, I could hit Control T. Do I have headers? Yes. So I hit enter. And now with the table functionality, I can right click anywhere in the table, and then it'll go ahead and say, do you want to have a totals row? I'll say yes. And now I can just come down here, it automatically drops a sum there, or I can say, no, give me the average, or no, give me the count. And you notice that it took off the dollar sign because it's intelligent. That's not a dollar value, right? It's got some count there instead, or give me the sum, right? So that's another functionality that we get from tables that's very useful. How are we doing? So far, so good? All right, let's keep going. Let's keep this rolling, and then maybe we can do some questions here in just a little bit. All right, so let's hop into some more functionality. We just talked about relevant references, right? You saw as we were moving down the sheet, every time we got to a different row, it automatically adjusted the formula to work with the correct row. But sometimes we actually want to keep our references absolute. There's a couple of instances where we might want to do this, right? Let's say we're reaching in and querying an entire table from a different sheet. We don't want to, every single time we move down the row, we don't want to move also down our table that we're querying. We want to leave that table that we're querying, we want to leave it anchored or absolutely referenced so that it doesn't move around. And the way you do that is with these dollar signs. So if I look up here in the formula bar, you see there's this formula, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. And you see there's these dollar signs before the cell identification, right? $B, $12 to $J, $27, right? So when we have those dollar signs in there, that means that that reference is not going to move. So if I start moving down my sheet, you'll notice that even though this reference right here is relevant, where it says B16, and now I move down, it says B17, now I move down, it says B18, this other reference here is not moving because that's an absolute reference. It doesn't change, right? So it's those dollar signs that keep those values anchored. All right, so now since we talked about absolute reference, why am I using that? What is this function that I'm creating right here? Okay, this function is called VLOOKUP. V stands for vertical, so vertical lookup. And what it means is I want to query or request some other data set, some other record set, and I want to say, anytime you find some value in another record set, then give me back a value that's related to it. Let's get into that because that's a little bit abstract, right? So if we recall on the prior page, we have this table that has a bunch of orders in it. And if I look at order number 2023-001, then the total for that value is $21, right? The total for that order is $21. But maybe I just started off with this table just like this, and I didn't know what the total was. I've just got this other data set that I'm working with, and I want to actually pull over those totals, right? And so I say, all right, go look up the record set that has this order in it and give me the total, add it to this other record set that I'm working with now. And the way I can do that is that vertical lookup. Look in this table, look vertically, so go down these records, and anytime you find the value that I want you to look for, bring me back some other value, and the other value I'm going to pick is the total, right? So let's go ahead and enter in that formula. We'll say equals V, and I just start writing, and you see that I kind of get this tooltip sort of hint already. And so I'll just go ahead and hit tab, and it populates that V lookup. And what value do I want to look up? I want to look up the order ID. And where do I want to look it up? What table array, what record set do I want to look it up in? I'll go ahead and come over here, and I'll say, pull it out of these records here, right? And then I'll go ahead and put a comma after that. See, I still got my hints. So I'll put a comma after that. And now it's asking me for the column index. If I count the number of columns, which number of column do I want to pull back the value from? Well, I'll say, let's count the columns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The ninth column has the total. The ninth column of this record set has the total, so I'll put 9. And then it says, do you want me to guess or do you want me to pull the exact matches? I want you to pull exact match, so I'm going to write false as this last value, and then close paren, and then enter. And what it's done is it's pulled over this value of $21. So since I referred to an entire table, it's just going to go ahead and say, we're going to look in table 14, and then I can double click on that little handlebar and pull it all the way down. And it'll bring in the right value. And you can see now that I've got the total for any one of these orders. And let's double check, right? Order 2023-008 has a value of $84. Is that correct? 2023-08, 84. Yes, it is. Now, since I referenced to a table, I didn't have to use absolute referencing. So let's see what happens when I convert this table back to a range. I right-click somewhere in the table, convert it back to a range, and I take away that special functionality. Left the formatting, but now it's back into it's just a normal range without that extra special formatting that I was talking about. Now, let's go ahead and rewrite our formula. And this time, I'm going to say equals V lookup, look up this value, look it up in this range here, bring over the ninth column, and don't guess. Bring over the exact amount. If I go ahead and do that, now we see that it's referenced this other sheet called Formulas and Functions, cell range B13 to J27, right? And if I just slowly start to drag this down, it'll pre-populate. But now you see it's using relevant references, right? B13, B14 to J28, B15 to J29. I don't want to do that because my other record said it's not moving down the page just because I'm moving my formula. So I want to leave it anchored. So I'll go ahead and I'll hit F4, and that'll put a little anchor on that first value, the upper left-hand corner of the range, and then F4 on the lower right-hand corner. That puts in those dollar signs, those absolute references. Now I can double click this. It'll drag it all the way down and bring in the right values. So far, so good. All right, cool. Let's keep going. There's tons that we could get into, right? So we'll just keep going with the time we got. The interesting thing about VLOOKUP formula is that this value here, this order ID, it has to be the furthest left item in the table. And if we see over here in this table, it is the furthest left item. So we're lucky that everything works out. But used to be that when you had, like, I don't know, the order ID, let's say I'm going to select this whole range and drag it way over here. When you got it way over here on the right-hand side, this VLOOKUP formula, it starts breaking for all different kinds of reasons that we could get into, but don't even need to necessarily deep dive into. But when that is not on the furthest left-hand column, the VLOOKUP stops working the way we want it to. So Microsoft developed this other functionality called XLOOKUP. And when you've got an XLOOKUP, your order ID, the amount that you're looking up in the other table, that can be anywhere. It can be in the middle column, it can be on the furthest right, it can be on the furthest left, doesn't matter. So think of XLOOKUP, I'm going to oversimplify. Think of XLOOKUP as a better version or more flexible version or newer, more modern version of VLOOKUP. There's differences, but for the sake of conversation, let's just pretend it's easy enough to say it that way, right? And the way you use XLOOKUP is to say equals XLOOKUP, and then look up that same value, look up the order value. What array or series of numbers do you want me to look this up in? I want you to look up this value in this array somewhere in here, right? And then I'm going to put a comma. And what array, when I find it, what array do you want me to return? I want you to return whatever's in this column right here. Now I'll close paren, hit enter, and you'll see that it goes ahead and finds it. Now, once again, since I don't expect my record set to move every time I go down the page, I'm going to go ahead and put absolute references. So I'll hit F4 there, and then I'll hit F4 on this one, and then make both of these absolute references so that they don't move just because I'm querying for a different record. And then I can drag that all the way down, and then I'll go ahead and populate the XLOOKUP function for that record set as well. All right, so VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP, that's where we're starting to move away from the fundamentals and kind of getting a little more towards the hero side of the conversation, where people are like, hey, how'd you do that? How'd you make that happen? So let's keep going with that sort of thing. All right, so when we wanted to pull over these values and we decided to bring them over as a table, let's go ahead and fix this this formula, since this was something that was using a VLOOKUP formula. So I'm going to say equals X lookup, and then look up this value, and then look up that value here, and then return this value here. You'll notice in a table set, it gets a little bit more automated, right? Because the table has additional functionality. And then I'll go ahead and I'll anchor my references so that it doesn't move it around just because I'm moving down the rows. And now you see all these numbers populate correctly again. All right, since I have this query results formatted as a table, I get that additional functionality. And one of the functionalities I get is filtering and sorting, right? So let's say, remember, I made this a table by hitting Control-T anywhere in the range. So now we get these little sort of inverted caret or downward facing triangle drop downs here. And as a result of that, we can filter this record set by, let's say we just want to see Alice's records, right? Go ahead and hit that there, and that pulls Alice's only. And then we can clear that filter by using that same value. And let's say we want to sort them largest to smallest order. It goes ahead and sorts them. So the tables have a bunch of additional functionality that make this data a little bit more useful, which is yet one more reason why we want to originally structure our data correctly, records going down the page, columns moving across, and unique values in each cell, and then also convert them to tables, right? A lot of additional functionality comes to us as a result of that. So something else that we can, oh, these were all VLOOKUPs, weren't they? Oh boy. So something else we can do is we can use conditional formatting to work with our tables and give ourselves some interesting views of our data. So let's go ahead and look up the order ID back in the original record set here, and then return the total here. And let's anchor these values to bring over the right ones. And actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm gonna, since the VLOOKUPs were originally set up this way, I'm going to bring these back over and then return this to a table to just to kind of make this work a little bit faster for us with some conditional formatting. So I can go ahead and bring this over here as well. Okay, so Now, something that we can also add to our tables to give it a little bit more visual appeal is this concept of conditional formatting. That's where you can take these numerical values and apply visually additional information, like fill up a sort of like progress bar by whichever values are the biggest in terms of my order, or just highlight the orders over $50, or give me warning for value below $30 and that sort of thing. And the way you do that is to come here and go to Home and then Conditional Formatting. And then you can use these different conditional formatting rules, like show me the color scales or show me different icon sets based on these different values, right? So here I've got some conditional formatting set up, and let's take a look at the rules that are here. I can click on Manage Rules, and I see what we're doing is we're saying that we're going to use these progress bars anywhere here for values that are above a certain amount. Here in this one, let's say, look at the rules. We've got cell values above 50 are getting highlighted. Here we say conditional formatting, manage the rules, and we've got icon sets being determined by these different value ranges, right? Anything above 60 gets an arrow up. That's real good. Anything 30, between 30 and 60 gets a yellow arrow pointing to the right. Anything below 30, red arrow pointing down. That's kind of throwing a warning flag for us. So that's a way of kind of providing some additional intuitive information on top of our table. And if you want to clear off any one of these rules, you can come here, highlight the whole column, and just click Conditional Formatting, Clear Rules, clear from the selected cells, and it'll take that stuff off. And that will be a way to kind of make that go away. I'll hit Control-Z and bring it back. Let's keep going for graphs and charts. And here we've got a little table, very small, simplistic table of our monthly sales, right? So we got sales for January of $139. Let's pretend that's 139,000, right? So a little bit more impressive. February, $203,000, I guess. March, $397,000. And let's say we want to actually turn that into a graph or a chart. A lot of people are going to use these two words interchangeably, graph and chart. If you want to get super technical, a graph probably has two different variables that it's being measured by. So this will be a graph, a variable of time across the x-axis, a variable of sales amounts across the y-axis. This on the right-hand side, pie chart, is just a chart because it's not presenting those two different variables related to one another. So you're going to hear people use these terms interchangeably a lot. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. So how can you go ahead and create a graph or chart from this type of a table that you've got set up? Well, I can go ahead and just highlight this whole table, select Insert. Right here, I came up to the top ribbon, I hit Insert, and then click on, maybe I don't know what type of chart I want to make. So I can click on Recommended Charts, and then it'll say, maybe you want to make a clustered column, maybe you want to make a line chart, maybe you want to make a filled in or stacked area chart, and you can just go ahead and click OK, and it'll produce one of these types of charts that you're interested in creating. A couple of quick thoughts on graphs and charts. A lot of times these columns are easier to compare to one another, right? So it's easy for me to see that January is less than February, very easy for me to see that February is less than March, but this is easier to compare January to February than the pie chart is. I can see it, but I have to look a little bit closer. So the column is really good at highlighting differences. Line charts are really good at creating trends. Pie charts, perhaps proportional relationships to one another, but to be honest, pie charts can hide a lot of things that you want to get into. So, you know, not necessarily the best type of chart to be using. I can click on these columns, right click, and then say Add Data Labels, and it'll actually put those dollar values there. And let's say that I want to do the same to my pie chart so that now suddenly it's actually a little bit easier to see. I can do that, and then I can even double click in any one of these items, and I can say, you know what, change that to the percentage, because maybe that's a little bit more interesting for me to see. The percentage, so I got the column chart on the left, the percentage pie chart on the right. Now maybe I'm getting some kind of different attribute or aspect of the data than I was before, maybe that's a little bit more interesting way to use a varying amount of graphs and charts. So that would be a good way to get started with data visualization, working from a simple data set. So far, so good. Let's see. How do we access the recording later? Yep, so far, so good. Okay, good deal. Let's keep going, and then I'll pause in just a second for some questions so that I'm being respectful of people's time, but also trying to remember this is 0 to hero. So we got a lot of ground to cover in this little amount of time. So let's hop into something called Sparklines, right? So let's look at something called transposition, something else called Sparklines. Start really engineering, manipulating, transforming our data. A lot of times you'll hear business analysts and people who work in data analytics, they'll say transformations. I want to take a data set, change it or in some way, mutate it, transform it, and then present it, do analysis based on top of that. So one interesting thing you can do is, you heard me saying a second ago that I want records to grow down the page. And so I've got like January, February, March kind of going down the page. And maybe I'm looking at attributes across the page, customer A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or whatever. And so now I'm seeing their information this way across the page and down. But maybe I then hand this over to an accountant, and the accountant says, as they often do, well, I want to see, left to right time. I want to see time moving left to right across the page, because that's how I read, that's how I look at financial statements, that's how I produce financial reports. And you'll say, but I'm a data analyst, I go down the page. And they say, well, I'm an accountant, I go left to right. You say, okay, I'm gonna make it left to right for you then, accountant. And so you'll start in the upper left hand corner, and you'll take this entire range, and you'll go ahead and click Control C, and then you're gonna paste this over here, but you're gonna paste it in a special way. So I'm gonna right click, and then if you look here, there's this symbol here that has these two arrows, one pointing down, one pointing to the right, and that says transpose. And what that does is it's going to take that information and shift it on its axis, so that now it's moving to where the time, or what was previously moving vertically down your page, down your column, is now moving across the rows. And I'll go ahead and click on that. So I just transposed this information, and then I want to bring over my customers as well. So I'll transpose that. So I'll special paste here as well, and then expand my column by double clicking there so I can see the right customers. I'm going to right click at the top of my column and insert an extra bit of space for me to work with. And then I'll come up here and I'll write customer as the heading of this column. And then maybe I'll transform this entire thing to a table so that it becomes more workable. And I'll remove some of the formatting that I copied by taking away those fills, and then maybe make this text black so that I can read that a little bit better. So now I have data moving left to right across the page, and that's pretty cool because that's how my accountant wants to see that. And then something else that they may see is, well, I see a bunch of numbers, but I kind of want to spot trends, and I want to see these sort of things jump out at me. And I said, okay, I got just the thing for you. I'm going to insert if you click on insert up here at the top and come over here to this group called Sparklines, I'm going to insert a Sparkline. The range for my Sparkline, I want it to read everything across one row. And then where do you want to put it? In W24? Yes, I do. So I'll go ahead and click OK. And then I'll double click this handle over here, or just maybe drag it down manually, and then give it a heading that says Sparklines. So now I actually have this visual presentation of this information. They'll say, wait a minute, looks like sales for all your customers took a dip right there in the middle of the period. Where is it? Oh, over here in July. Oh, okay. Visually, you can see that information that previously you couldn't necessarily see when you're just looking at a bunch of numbers across the page, right? So Sparklines can be very useful to present that type of information. And before we pause for questions, let's hop into one more topic that always comes up that is kind of starts to move definitely into that little bit more hero mode, and that's pivot tables. Pivot tables is a extremely useful functionality for Excel that creates a lot of different type of capability for us. So let's say we've got a table. We're still looking at these fictitious orders of, Alice and Bob and Carol, and they're making these orders. And we want to take this information and we want to kind of slice it and dice it and look at it a bunch of different ways, right? So I've got my table. I've already formatted as a table so that I have the extra functionality. I've even sorted it kind of smallest to largest so that I can like kind of start to look at it. But I want to look at different attributes of it. Maybe it's actually like it's a table with 20 columns, and I kind of want to choose which columns I'm going to slice and dice by. So I want to do a pivot table. So I'm going to click anywhere in my table, and I'm going to say on the top ribbon, I'm going to click Insert and then Pivot Table, and then it says, do you want to use this table or range? And it's selected you can see the green moving line around the range that I want to use, and I'll say yes. And they say, where do you want to put it? You want to put it on an entirely new sheet, or you just want to put it on this existing worksheet? Let's go ahead and just use this existing worksheet. So it says what location you want to put. So I'll come down here, and I'll say just drop it down here. And now I'll go ahead and click OK. And you'll see what it does is it gives me this blank canvas. And this canvas says, all right, what do you want to pivot? And well, I want to, for a pivot table, you're always summing, well, probably not always, but probably summing something. And then you're looking at different dimensions of that information. So I want to sum the quantitative data that I have here, or my total. So I'll go ahead and bring this total down in the lower right-hand quadrant of my pivot tables fields, and you even see the Greek letter sigma there. Sigma means sum in mathematical notation. So I'll drop it right there, and it's summed up the total of all orders. And since this is dollars, I'll click on this little caret, click on the value field sign, click on number format, and choose accounting presentation style. Click OK. So now it's showing a dollar sign there. And now it says, what dimension do you want to slice and dice it by? Well, maybe I want to use customers as a way to slice and dice that, put the customers on a row and give me the sum by customer. And so now you see what it's done is it's just taken the unique values here, Alice, Bob, and Carol, and it's summed up the total orders for each of those customers and given you those summations there. And you say, wow, okay, that was a really quick way to kind of summarize this. Wait, somebody wants to see it with the names across the top. Okay, so I pivot this information by clicking and dragging the customer to columns, and now Alice, Bob, and Carol across the top. We're data analysts. We don't want to do that, so we'll bring it back to the row. But that's why you can pivot it, because you can move these things around and slice and dice them in a bunch of different ways. And then maybe we say, well, we want even more rich analysis of our data. So let's take the total, drop it down again here. Now it's become a little bit redundant, right? But we're going to look at a different dimension or a different aspect of the same data. Click on this downward facing caret. Click on value field settings. I want to show the value as not no calculation, but a percentage of the grand total. So now it's going to automatically calculate a percent of how much of the sales is for Alice, how much is for Bob, how much is for Carol, 36, 51, 12%. Now I'm starting to get some really interesting information out of my data. And then something else that's interesting is from here, I can actually just go ahead and create a chart right away. So I'll click anywhere in my pivot table, click pivot chart. It'll recommend me a couple of charts here. I'll say, okay, this is the one I want to use. I want to use Alice, sum, Bob, sum, Carol, sum, etc. So now I've created a pivot table and a pivot chart. And now we're starting to get into hero territory for our Excel skills, right? Moving from zero to hero. So that's maybe a good place for me to pause and see if there's any questions, because I know we're kind of getting right up towards the end of the hour. As you can see, there's other stuff, that's kind of written at the bottom of some of these sheets, keyboard shortcuts, different templates and add-ins, how we can do Power Query, statistical analysis, all kinds of stuff that we could get into, but we got a limited amount of time to try and get you to hero mode. So let's see if you got any questions about anything that we've covered so far. I don't see any questions. All right, let's do this. All right, since we don't want to rush ourselves right up to the last possible second, let's say that where can you find some additional resources to learn more and deep dive about stuff that we've been talking about right now. So believe it or not, the #1 place to get additional resources on Excel is actually Microsoft's website. Support.microsoft.com or whatever their domain is the best documentation. Microsoft documentation on Excel is extraordinary, right? So let's say we come here and we say Excel pivot tables and click enter. You see support.microsoft.com is the first result that comes up. I'll click on create a pivot table. I can see these resources here. This is the best source of information. It's the most authoritative. Now, that being said, it's also perhaps the most dense and technical. So although it's the best, you may decide that you want to look at like Coursera or some other type of resource for something a little more friendly, where somebody kind of like me, kind of conversationally explains you through it, rather than you reading some cold, hard documentation written by an engineer at Microsoft, right? So you can check out that documentation. And then I would say, please also link up with me on LinkedIn in case you want. You can stay in touch with me there. Let me know your questions, and then we can explore those types of things together. So looks like Melissa has a question. As a graduating accounting major, oh, I love that. Are there any Excel skills I should prioritize learning going into the workforce? Okay, yes, the answer is yes. In addition to that work that you heard me talk about doing, I teach both at the undergrad level and the master's level of accounting at FAU. And some of the things that I say that the students must absolutely take with them to prepare for a good career in accounting are that how to format and use tables extensively. So I got into that one a little bit early. So converting a range to tables, how to structure that data properly and think with the data mindset, but then also how to create basic charts. And then the one thing that they're most likely to ask in the interview, believe it or not, is, are you good with pivot tables? That's what they're going to ask. And the reason is because there's going to be all these exports that they pull down from the CRM and the ERP system and all these other places. And they're going to say, all right, do this analysis, do that analysis. And you can convert that huge range into a little chart. And you can just select the variables that I mentioned and the values that you want to sort by. And you can slice and dice it for the accounting department. So pivot tables is the question that when you're asked, you want to respond, yes, I have worked with pivot tables. I'm familiar with them. I know how to use them. I actually got a few tricks up my sleeve. That's where I'm very good. So that's the skill that I would like for you to prioritize when you're preparing for interviews. Great question, Melissa. And then someone else says, have you used any AI tools like ChatGPT to help streamline some of the Excel tasks? The answer is yes. So there are add-ins already being made. Not for Microsoft Excel, but for Google Sheets, Google's equivalent of Excel, that can hit the API directly and can infer something from a cell. And then you can sort of write in natural language. You can write the functionality that you would like to perform, and it'll convert it to the proper sort of function or formula. And I've done that. And I've also used ChatGPT to help me when I have multiple dependent formulas that I know I'm going to be writing. I'll say to ChatGPT, hey, I'm going to write this type of formula. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And I want to be able to find this value. I want to find the lowest value. I want to find for a cohort analysis. I want to find the month that this customer started and identify that month for every single customer, in this list of 100,000 customers. And I'm going to calculate the number of months that they've been with us, so I can calculate a retention rate for customer lifetime value and all these kinds of things. So I've had that conversation back and forth with ChatGPT. It was excellent, very useful. You do need to be able to recognize when it's giving you some sort of nonsense responses and kind of filter through that and say, hey, here's what you said wrong. Help me out. Help me find this instead. So you still need to have a lot of context, but it's very useful, very, very useful for Excel formulas. Great questions. So I think we've probably, Nikki, correct me if I'm wrong, but come up against our time. And so maybe I'll leave you there and just invite anybody to stay in touch who wants to talk more. Am I frozen? Is Nikki frozen?
No, yeah, I can hear you and I can see Nikki, but I think she's frozen.
Okay.
But thank you, Rob, so much. This was so helpful. So many questions. I see people were like, wow, I'm taking this down. And we're definitely recording, we're uploading. So stay tuned. Maybe we'll have a second edition or a part 2 with more information. But thank you, Rob. I appreciate it. Oh, Nick, you're back.
Yeah, thank you, Nadia. I was gonna thank you for stepping in because, of course, my computer decides to go kaput right at the end. So
That's all right.
I got most of that at the end there, Rob. So thank you very much. I thought it was some great questions. I know I learned a lot. I saw people in the very beginning. I think you were like 10 minutes in, said, "Oh, I already learned something." So I think it was good.
Awesome. Well, good. I'm glad. Thanks very much for the opportunity, and to anybody who's observing Good Friday, happy, or I guess a peaceful Good Friday to you. And I hope everyone who observes Passover had a wonderful Passover as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for all the attendees. And this will be, because it's recorded, I will be putting it on YouTube. So I'll make sure to send out the link afterwards. And then, Rob, if you have anything that you would like to send to anybody, any links, anything, Nadia and I can get that from you. And we can also send that in the follow-up email to everybody.
My pleasure.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.